Hey guys, welcome back to Hi Seth. Hi, my name is Seth Chuang, 31-year-old beginner filmmaker. Today, we're going to have an in-depth review of the Sony a7S III. Are you ready? Let's go. Hope you enjoyed that. The Sony a7S III is a long-awaited camera since the Sony a7S II, which was announced on 11th of September 2015. That's why you hear reviews about how people have been waiting for it for over 5 years. Announced on 28th July 2020, this camera was designed by Sony with the intention of being its most supreme alpha line of mirrorless cameras yet. How supreme? 4K 120 FPS. When people have expected it to have 4K 60 FPS, the Sony a7S III delivered 4K 120 frames per second as a full-frame camera. 4K 120 FPS in a full-frame camera as of 2020 is still a rare capability that's reserved for the very best of industry professionals. For example, Sony's own cinema-grade camera, the FX9, which is priced at $10,997 as of 2020. The Sony a7S III is $3,500, about one-third the FX9's price. And at this price, it's now within the reach of literally anyone who's willing to save about $100 per month for 3 years to afford it. 10-bit 422. While having a high frame rate like 4K 120 FPS seems amazing, the most amazing capability that the Sony a7S III provides is actually 10-bit recordings at PRORES 422. In layman's terms, that means control over the colors of your recordings in post and ease of speed editing. At times, word can hardly describe how amazing or valuable this is. Most cameras which are targeted at the average consumer instead of absolute professionals these days record 8-bit color depth. In technical terms, 8-bit footages are comprised of red, green, and blue with 256 levels or variations each. Together, they make up the 16.7 million different colors that we see in an 8-bit recording. How do we get 16.7 million? We get it by a multiplication of 256 red times 256 green and 256 blue. The total, as a result, is about 16.7 million color variations. On the other hand, 10-bit footages are comprised of red, green, and blue with 1024 levels or variations each. As a result, it can display a whopping 1.06 billion variations of colors. That's about 64 times more color variations. In photo terms, color grading an 8-bit video is similar to color grading a JPEG file. Consumer-grade raw still images, on the other hand, are similar to 12 to 14-bit recordings. While a 10-bit recording may not grade as insanely well as a consumer-grade raw file, this jump in bit depth from 8-bit to 10-bit is a dramatic change in the data that you can color grade. So how does this translate into color grading? It means freedom. More freedom to make some mistakes when recording. More freedom to correct your recordings later in post, as long as it's not over or underexposed. And more freedom to edit your footages so that they can convey the emotions you wish to convey. But it doesn't stop there. If you so ever wish, you can actually record 16-bit raw recording from your Sony a7SIII compressed in a 12-bit PRORES RAW with the ATOMOS Ninja 5 external monitor. We'll get back to this later. Dynamic range. About 13 stops of usable dynamic range in S-Log3. To provide a comparison, the Red Epic MX or ARRI Alexa 65, which are used for some of the largest movie productions like Lord of the Rings, The Revenant, or Joker recently in 2019, have about over 13 to 14 stops of usable dynamic range as well. The Red Epic MX was $34,500 and the ARRI Alexa 65 was $150,000 when first launched. In other words, with a Sony a7SIII, you now have access to cinema-grade dynamic range. Low-light king of cameras in 2020. Yes. How? By being a 12 megapixel camera. You might think, even a budget APS-C camera like the Sony a6400 has 24 megapixels of photo and video capabilities. How is it that the a7SIII has only 12 megapixels? To answer that, the ARRI Alexa LF in 2018, which is priced over $100,000, and the ARRI Alexa Mini in 2018, which is priced over $50,000, and also used to shoot Aladdin with Will Smith as Genie in 2019, shoots 4K at 12.7 megapixels of resolution. How can the go-to camera by Oscar-winning directors have such a low megapixel? The answer: quality of the resolution rather than quantity of the resolution. With the Sony a7SIII, the same applies. Because it has less pixels occupying the space in its full-frame sensor, we can have what's called a larger photo site. In general, that means each pixel is larger. When the photo site on your sensor is larger, it can take in more light per pixel. Hence, supreme low light capabilities. With a combination of all that we have listed so far, 4K 10-bit 422, 13 stops of usable dynamic range on S-Log3, and a supreme low light capability, plus offered at a size and price that is favorable to consumers. That's why the Sony a7SIII has been referred to as being close to a perfect camera by many people around the world today. Storage size. We haven't gone to storage size. There is a reason why even commercial grade work is still delivered at 1080p to clients today. 4K is going to be a standard one day, but even then, without a rush. You see, not all 4K is the same. Even between 8-bit 4K, there's a choice for 60 megabits per second or 100 megabits per second 8-bit footages, for example. The lower the megabits, the more the camera takes part of your footage that's not moving and duplicates its details from frames previously recorded. This is what's generally referred to as compression. With greater compression comes less data or less accurate details and potentially more compression artifacts. It's especially so when shooting in low light because duplicating noise isn't attractive, or when motion and focus blur should look real and detailed. For digital artifacts or visual oddness, when color graded, they would tend to be more obvious. That, as a result, leads to a less aesthetically pleasing footage. At 10-bit 4:2 4K XAVCS format, which a lot of us are familiar with editing today, the only bitrate available for 25 frames per second is 140 megabits per second. This means 17.5 megabytes per second footages. 1 megabyte is 8 megabits. That's how we calculate the size of storage needed per second in megabytes from the camera's indicated megabit size. 17.5 megabytes per second also means that a 1-minute footage will be about 1.05 gigabytes. That's 17.5 megabytes times 60 seconds in size when recorded internally. That's about 60 1-minute recordings on a 64 gigabyte SD card. This is still manageable. At 10-bit 4:2 4K XAVCS format for 50p, the only choice will be 200 megabits per second. This means 25 megabytes per second footages. A 1-minute video at 25 megabytes per second will be 1.5 gigabytes in size when recorded internally. Yes, it's not double in size. It's about 7 to 8 megabytes more per second. So shooting in 50 frames per second, if you have sufficient lighting, is a pretty good option if you might need to slow down your clips in any way. That's about 42 1-minute recordings on a 64 gigabytes of SD card. A 10-bit 4:2 4K XAVCS format for 100p. The only choice will be 280 megabits per second. This means 35 megabytes per second footages, meaning a 1-minute video will be 2.1 gigabytes in size when recorded internally. That's about 30 1-minute recordings on a 64 gigabytes of SD card. Did you notice that I mentioned when recorded internally all this while? Yes, this is where we come back to the ATOMOS Ninja 5. The external monitor that will allow Sony a7SIII users to record Sony's 16-bit linear RAW recordings in PRORES 12-bit RAW recordings. In other words, it will allow you to record 12-bit RAW footages. You see, actual PRORES 10-bit 4:2 at its original size on ATOMOS Ninja 5, non-compressed, meaning not in XAVCS compression type, for example, is massive. To give you an idea, when I recorded an 18-second 4K 25p video, my file size was 1 gigabyte. That's about 55 megabytes per second. In megabits per second, that's a 440 megabits per second file size. So while my 4K 25p XAVCS recording has a bitrate of 140 megabits per second at PRORES 10-bit 4:2, which results in a 17.5 megabytes per second file size, the ATOMOS Ninja 5 at PRORES 4:2 for 4K 25p has a bitrate of about 440 megabits per second, which results in a 55 megabytes per second recording. That's a 3.3 gigabytes per minute file size. Does this mean the ATOMOS Ninja 5 records better quality when you set your camera to record at 4K XAVCS 24p or 25p as opposed to its ATOMOS recorded PRORES 422 files? Technically, the answer should be no. It should mean that without compression, without additional codecs, original PRORES 422 is capable of storing footages with much larger megabits per second recordings. It records MOV files instead of MP4, but MOV and MP4 are just containers or wrappers, so they are not relevant to determining file sizes. So what does this all mean? It means that technically you can set the A7S3 to record at XAVCS with 25p, 250 megabits per second bitrate in your camera, and set the ATOMOS Ninja to record at PRORES 422 to give you the same image quality as XAVCS 24 or 25 frames per second is intended to be. In camera, it'll be a 31.25 megabytes per second recording, which means about 1.87 gigabytes per minute. On the ATOMOS Ninja 5, however, if the bitrate remains the same, it'll still be a 55 megabytes per second recording, which translates into a 3.3 gigabytes per minute file size. Take note that all these ATOMOS PRORES 422 bitrate discussions we're having so far is for 24 or 25p. I have yet to record 50 or 60p footages with PRORES 422 on ATOMOS. 100 to 120p will automatically be converted into UHD 50 or 60 recordings, no matter the format you choose in camera. And what it really all means is that if you're thinking about recording externally on ATOMOS Ninja 5, do understand that file sizes will be much larger on ATOMOS Ninja 5. If you need to store backups, you need to plan accordingly so that you're not surprised by the storage space you need in the long term to store your footages. If you're a content creator who publishes frequently on YouTube, or you shoot videos professionally for clients who may not need the highest quality in bitrate or bit depth, shooting most of your work in camera or in a more compressed PRORES 422 LT format on the ATOMOS would certainly save you big on storage costs. Side note, PRORES 12-bit RAW recordings on the ATOMOS is 1.3 gigabytes for 20 seconds of 24p or 25p recording. That means about 65 megabytes per second, or about 520 megabits per second bitrate for 24 or 25p recordings. A 1-minute PRORES RAW recording, as a result, will be 3.9 gigabytes in size. To put it in the context of a 64 gigabytes SD card, that's likened to about 16 minutes of recordings to fill up your card. This is purely for your reference to know the kind of file sizes to expect when recording in 12-bit 4K PRORES RAW. Low light capability with limbing LUTs. Test number 1. S-Log3 640 base ISO. Test number 2, S-Log3 1600 ISO. Test number 3, S-Log3 3200 ISO. Test number 4, S-Log3 6400 ISO. Test number 5, S-Log3 10,000 ISO. Test number 6, S-Log3 12,800 ISO, which is where the dual native base ISO kicks in. Test number 7, S-Log3 16,000 ISO. Test number 8, S-Log3 32,000 ISO. Test number 9, S-Log3 64,000 ISO. And finally, test number 10, S-Log3 10,000 ISO versus 64,000 ISO. This should give you a pretty good idea of which level of ISO would be more beneficial for you to use in various circumstances. Personally, whenever I need to push the ISO, I will always prefer to go to 12,800 ISO and then use the ND filter to adjust back to reduce the brightness accordingly. In my opinion, that has given me much cleaner footages with a lot more flexibility and versatility. How to expose to the right? ETTR for S-Log3. Why expose to the right? It's so you can drop the shadows and blacks in your recorded footage and reduce noise with S-Log3 while maintaining high dynamic range. How to do it? Turn on histogram display on A7SIII. Then, aim to expose while moving your graph to the right, as much as possible without the graph going over the right frame of the histogram. Anything past that will be overexposed. Gerald Undone also has a video about how to expose for middle gray. That's technically more correct, using a gray card or, for example, an X-Rite color checker. I'm a bit more run and gun, so I just ETTR, expose to the right, and color correct in post-production. After all, that's one of the major benefits of a 10-bit camera, right? How to do that on ATOMOS Ninja 5? In video mode, shooting wide open, just increase your ISO and aim to shoot below 100 IRE. If you need to go high on ISO, you can go to 12,800 ISO, which is a second dual native base ISO, and use an ND filter to darken the footage as necessary. Another one of A7SIII's most powerful features. That's it. That's how you expose to the right for S-Log3. Autofocus. The autofocus capabilities of the Sony a7SIII is known to be so good, it's good enough to be treated as if you have a focus puller in camera. In real-world use, these two features, when mastered, are also what makes its autofocus capabilities amazing. The first one is Autofocus transition speed. Autofocus transition speed means how fast the autofocus turning, imagine with the manual lens, will be from one object to another. The second will be autofocus subject shift sensitivity. Autofocus subject shift sensitivity, on the other hand, means how long the autofocus should hold on its latest object or subject. The lower the speed, the longer the same focus will be held or maintained on the same object or subject before the program decides to switch focus to another target. SD cards. Go straight for the V90 UHS-2 cards whenever possible. V90 UHS-2 cards will get you the entire range from 4K 24 or 25p to 4K 100 or 120p. In 1080p, the V90 cards are what will allow you to shoot 240 frames per second. Anything lower than that and you can't shoot 1080p 240 frames per second footages. The only modes it can't shoot at is 4K 100 to 120p XAVCS in SNQ mode, which has 500 to 600 megabits per second of recordings. You're a master at bitrate now by the time you watch till this part of the video, right? So let's do one more revision. 500 to 600 megabits per second is about 62.5 to 75 megabytes per second recordings. See, if V90 cards can maintain a minimum write speed of over 90 megabytes per second and up to about 299 megabytes per second or so, why aren't Sony allowing the V90 cards to capture these higher requirement footages like XAVCS 4K 120p? There might be some science behind it to ensure really stable recordings, but in general, 4K 120p XAVCS recordings will need a CF Type A card, which as of this video, only Sony is manufacturing. Their cost, however, is a little bit impractical. The 80GB CF Type A card costs $198, about $200, whereas the 160GB one would cost $398, about $400. That's not including an exclusive reader that you'd have to buy for the CF Type A cards that costs $118. So if you wish to buy it right, I recommend getting the 256GB V90 UHS card straight up to enable XAVCS 4K 24p to 120p. As of this video, I highly recommend ProRes Digital. There have been testings done with the ProRes Digital V90 UHS-2 cards, and it seems that it can perform slightly better than equivalent UHS-2 V90 cards. Sony and Lexa both currently offers only up to 120GB for their V90 UHS-2 cards, but they definitely enable the full spectrum of recordings as well. I'm sure there'll be more brands who come up with the 256GB version soon enough, but so far these are the brands and options I recommend at the time of this recording. Conclusion: with a Sony a7SIII, you should be set as a professional filmmaker, cinematographer, or videographer for years to come. Its compact size puts it in a very unique place in the range of cinema-grade cameras available. Within one camera, the range of motion pictures that you can create with it is truly incredible. Its ceiling of performance is incredibly high, and you can rely on it to perform impeccably even when it's compact enough to be treated as a personal camera. It's an almost perfect camera, definitely the best run-and-gun camera that exists today. With 4K 120 frames per second, supreme low-light capabilities. At the current file sizes, I don't think we need more, for example, resolution for many years to come. I mean, even at 4K PRORES RAW, we're looking at about 3.9 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes of files per minute for 25 frames per second recordings. That's 234 gigabytes for an hour of video, or 1 terabyte, which is 1000 gigabytes of SSD drive, will store only about 4 hours of these PRORES RAW clips. So do we really need more resolution? I present you again the Sony a7SIII. Perhaps the camera closest to being a perfect camera of its time. If you can order one, just go get it today. So I hope this video helps. In general, where are we going with this channel? My plan for this channel is honest reviews from a beginner filmmaker, unbiased, on cameras, lenses, filmmaking gear in general, and with God's blessings, perhaps I may have the skills one day to create truly breathtaking videos that can touch the lives of people and help a lot of people to live life better. Till the next video, be love.